Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Maureen and I volunteer as the National Coordinator for Compassion Connectors here in Australia. The Compassion Connector program is an initiative of the Global Compassion Coalition, or the GCC as we call it, with the goal of helping to build societies around the world based on compassion. So today we celebrate compassion together with the GCC, the Charter for Compassion here in Australia, and also the Compassion Council of Australia. So our aim today is to explore and define three main topics to help celebrate compassion in action and to supercharge our national and global movement for a more compassionate world. And to help us do that, I'm privileged to chat with Mr. Matt Hawkins, who was instrumental in getting the GCC's Connectors program up and running around the world. Quite an achievement. Thank you, Matt. Great success of being a part of it. So Matt has dedicated his life's work so far in helping to build a more compassionate world, a world where we prioritize connection and care in our communities. He has been the Chief Executive Officer of the GCC and the co-founder of Compassion in Politics in the UK, an organisation that is focused on bringing empathy and fairness into politics in the UK, and now I believe Compassion in Politics in Australia. So you never know,
It is, yeah.
we might see some more empathy and fairness in our politics as well. So Matt has also co-edited the book, How Compassion Can Focus Our Politics, Economy and Society. So he's a very talented and compassionate man. So it is an indeed to speak with you today, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Maureen. Thanks so much for having me. It's really great to be here and always to chat with you, Maureen.
Thank you. So let's get straight into it. I'll ask you a pretty obvious question. So what is compassion and what does it mean for you personally?
Yeah, well, thank you, Maureen. And I know that there are lots of kind of ways into compassion. There's plenty of different schools of thought around it. For me, and I think increasingly for the community that are particularly focused on compassion as something that's trainable, that's or used in therapy, it's very much about it's about action. It's about trying to change a situation for people and for planet and to be guided in that towards care and support. Um, Rooted in that for me has always been, and goes back to when I sort of first stepped into understanding more about the world of compassion. I mean, I sort of obviously knew it as a word, but in terms of understanding the depth of thought that exists around how we can treat one another with compassion ourselves and build a compassionate society. What is really important to me has always been common humanity, and by that understanding that we are all here without having chosen to be. We all have tricky and difficult brains, and we're all trying to essentially do our very best. And if you can believe that, and if you can really sort of imbibe that in the way that you live and approach things, it can be both incredibly beneficial, I think, for you as an individual, for one as an individual, to kind of feel that sense of common community with other people. And it can also make a major difference to how we think about world issues or how we think about how we build our organizations and our institutions. So that's at its root for me, that common humanity, and that leads to a desire and, as I say, this action towards caring and supporting others.
Mm. So has there been situations or one particular incident when you witnessed or experienced an act of compassion that deeply impacted you or your life or your relationships? Or is it just a gradual process
I
that?
think, for, I mean, I think it's been a kind of, so as I referred in that previous answer to stepping in or sort of like opening up this world of compassion for me. And what happened at that time was that actually it was I think it was 2016, it was certainly around 10 years ago. And I had spent all the years since I'd left university, working in campaigns, working in movements. And I personally was feeling quite burnt out by the experience. I think there can be a culture of that often in that sector of kind of it's all about the ends. You don't think about the means along the way, and people being overworking and overcommitting to things, and also coming up against constantly the same barriers to change, which is that certainly here in the UK, and I think in lots of part of the world, we have a political and economic culture which is not conducive to the kind of progressive, caring, compassionate change that a lot of us are seeking. And I read at that time Paul Gilbert's The Compassionate Mind, which really was talking about all the kinds of things I said in the previous answer about common humanity and compassion being an action, and about the way that societies are shaped, influencing how we think about each other and ourselves, and that so much of this is something that we as humans, as society, can choose, not an individual, of course, but we as humans, as a collective, are able to choose the kind of societies and the communities that we live in. And that was a whole series of revelations that really made an enormous amount of difference to me about the way I felt about myself and the role that I was playing and what I thought, and the kind of work that I wanted to do. So that was what made a huge difference. I have to say, in terms of perhaps a more personal experience of seeing compassion in action, um, the work that the connectors have done at the Global Compassion Coalition that I've been had the privilege of being a part of, has been one of those kinds of like such deep experience for me in learning, because we have people who are often in very difficult circumstances themselves, or even if they're not, they are still in a situation in which they are essentially volunteering their time for this effort to try and bring more compassion to their community. And the experimentation that's gone on, the willingness to try things out, the solidarity, the connection, the sharing that's been going on between people. And I think, you've been a major part of that, Maureen, and seen it as well. I've just realized, I think theoretically, you always hope and believe that people have that depth to their ability to kind of offer and support one another and just be brave and try things out. But when you see it happen, it's like a whole nother stage of learning and understanding. So, two different experiences, bookended at two different times in my life, I suppose. But yeah, both really informative in what I'm doing.
Yeah. So what benefits do you see, particularly like you talked about common humanity,
Mm.
like what impact do you believe that compassion can have on human connection generally? So
Mm. I think it's the basis of that, of
yeah,
connection. I
yeah.
think it's the it's the connection that fuels the compassion. So it's a kind of cyclical thing. I think we as humans, we need connection,
Mm,
and we need that in a very literal sense, in that we are dependent and interdependent upon one another. Uh, the tea that I just drank, the water that made it, these are all things that have been brought to me and by other people. And the shower I had just before I joined this,
mm,
everything, just down to every minute detail. So I
mm,
think compassion is partly about seeing that and recognizing that, and stepping away from a story about ourselves, which says that, oh, we're entirely independent, and it's all about the individual, and it's all about the work that you do and your skills and assets and so on. And it doesn't take a great deal of thinking to realize that that isn't true, but it's about living the truth of who we are, and that dependence upon one another. And
mm.
then I think once you're able to recognize and celebrate that, the curiosity, the interest in other people that can spark, can also further kind of um, can really cultivate more compassionate action because you're seeing the human, the person behind that, and trying to understand their circumstances and what's brought them to who they are and the struggles that they have. I think that there is such a this kind of the individualist culture not only um, uh, puts so much pressure on us as who we are to try and perform and live up to some image that we have about who we're meant to be, but also it completely shuts off the creative part of our brain that can really try and empathize and understand what other people are going through. And we get used to not practicing that so much. We make a lot of assumptions about other people, either that they are incredibly strong or that they're more intelligent than us. We do a lot of comparing, or we kind of perhaps judge them in certain ways rather than doing that bit of extra work to actually understand who they are. So yeah, it's compassion is both the thing that is uh, driving connection, and connection also drives compassion.
Yeah, absolutely. So what areas do you believe uh, compassion is most needed? Would it be, or where do you think the most impact could be if, in what sector or what area? Like,
Mm.
would it be education? Would it be in politics? Or would it be basically the same? Or where do you feel the most change is needed?
I think I think the biggest change that is needed is with us. Is something that every person can discover, and um, the I said about the kind of culture that we're living in and the stories that that tells about who we are, and that creates a sense of separation from ourselves, from our needs and our nature, and also from community and society. And that's where we have to start. We have to start with recognizing that truth of who we are and the fact of common humanity, the fact of our interdependence. Where that leads people to will be different depending on their own circumstances, their own needs, their own story, their own passions. And I think what changes societies can never be one focus, can never be one kind of almost like a top-down plan of how this is going to happen. It only can happen through lots and lots of different experimentation, lots of different parts of society, which builds up that sense of um, uh, it frees human creativity and experimentation and ensures that it's something that's really genuine and raw and contextually and culturally relevant. But it also is something that starts to change the way that society thinks about itself, and what becomes more natural and more normal and more popular has to happen through this kind of organic process. I personally started out working in politics because I believed that, um, partly because I worked in politics and I'd kind of seen the immense harm that was done to anyone who tried to engage with the political process, but also to people who work in politics because of a culture that was not at all compassionate. I um, uh, I think increasingly for me, the work that I've done since in the Global Compassion Coalition, I'd say has shifted my focus slightly more to um, not. I'm trying to explain this the best way I can. It's not a rejection of that. It's not stepping away from that. But I think I've really come to recognize the inherent power, the nascent, untapped power perhaps that it exists just out there in society, in communities, in individuals, and that actually that is where the momentum is probably more likely to be built. And as I said, if you can create a sense that being compassionate is the popular choice, politics will follow. That's the nature of politics. It goes where the popular thing is. And actually we don't have to target there if we want to start something today. You can start something today in just your own personal choices, or with one other person. It doesn't have to just be a grand scheme for change of the political system, for example. Um, Sorry, it's a bit rambling, Maureen, but I
All
think
right.
I'm trying to get to that point, which is
Yeah.
basically that I don't think there's one way, and I think that the way is the way that will be found by people once they start to kind of question some of the basic assumptions that we have at the moment.
So you mentioned, that what we can all do in our local community. Did
Mm.
you notice any barriers to compassion in your own community, or like I think you alluded to it in your workplace previously,
Mm.
but in your immediate community. So did you notice any barriers to compassion, or did you try to overcome those barriers to create a more compassionate and just community? And if you did, what did you do and did it work?
Yeah, I mean, I live in London, and
Mm,
anyone who has visited London or lived in London knows what it can be like living in a city of that
mm,
size, and a city also which is grounded in, the economy here is grounded in often quite a brutal uh the financial capitalist system. And I certainly noticed that. I think when you live here, there's a complete sense of often a complete sense of separation from one another. I was saying to you, Maureen, earlier that my
mm,
dad, who is Australian, has just visited me here in London. This is his first visit to the UK for 25 years. He's this Australian guy who has lived. He lived in Sydney for a bit, but he spent quite a lot of his life as well living outside the cities in Australia. So he comes with this completely different attitude of like, I'll talk to anyone, I'll connect with anyone. And people here were just baffled by this kind of people in London just don't do that. They don't talk to one another very often. Um, However, having said that, I think that I see that desire for connection and that desire for community come through quite strongly in a complete contrast to that. At the weekend, we went to a neighbour's, it was their 60th birthday, and he'd invited lots of the neighbours around us to come. And people just absolutely loved the fact that there were these people there that they had seen on the streets. But they
mm.
didn't know their story. They didn't know anything about them, and love just, and I did too. You felt it, just like learning about one another's history and kind of, oh, you've been here this long, oh, that house used to be that. And so the barrier is there in that it's a kind of belief people carry with them. But I think it doesn't take much to kind of break that open. You then asked about community work that I've done here. It's a mix of things. I did run for back when I was more kind of focused on politics. I ran to be a local councillor. And so that obviously involved doing community work as well as being out there campaigning. But I think almost a more optimistic story in a way, although it has a very sad beginning to it, comes from the fact that there was a lady here who she was experiencing homelessness. She lived under the railway bridge, just about 5-10 minute walk away from here, and everyone knew her. Everyone in this part of London knew Stephanie, because she would talk to everyone. She would help people out. She would, help people with their buggies and their wheelchairs as they came down the steps underneath the railway. She sadly died, a few years ago, but we then, in response, launched a crowdfunder to be able to pay for both the costs of her repatriation because she was Italian and funeral, and then to kind of create a pool of money that could be used to support homeless people in the future, people experiencing homelessness, sorry, in the future. Um, and something kind of lit up. Everyone, as I said, knew Stephanie. They wanted to be able to help. They, I think, felt that incredible pain that something couldn't and wasn't done before people had walked past me included, and you didn't know how to necessarily help or change the situation. And it really was a sense of like Forest Hill area, a large number of people at least, saying this isn't okay, coming together and saying we don't want this to be able to happen again. So these moments show that that connection, that desire to offer care and support is there, that desire to feel something and to feel recognized and to feel recognition as well. So yeah, there are a lot of barriers because of the cultures that we live in, but like I said, it doesn't take much to spark
No,
people out of that. And
no.
it's what you do then that matters.
Yeah, I believe it would be difficult, in large cities, to create a sense
Mm.
of community. I mean, where do you
Yeah.
start? But you did mention that it's, just by having a birthday party or a get together,
Mm.
it
Yeah.
seems to be a relatively simple thing to do, and yet we don't do it, in a lot of times.
Mm.
We don't take the time or make the effort, but
No.
people just really love it when we do. So, yeah,
Yeah,
but
I was speaking.
cities
I'm
are.
partly being in.
Mm.
Sorry, Mark. Sorry.
So I'm just
I'm.
cities are particularly, I would imagine, quite difficult, to create a sense of community.
They are, but I think almost it's because we think, oh, sit. I do it, and I did it when I started answering the question. You think
Mm,
it's so hard. It's millions of people.
mm,
What on earth can I do? I'm one. But
mm,
actually, what we felt when we went to this party was suddenly this like sense of an identity of this. We were all talking, and stories were interweaving, as I said, about like how long people have been here or favorite places to visit and things like that. And I was speaking, partly being influenced in what I'm saying, because I was speaking yesterday to Donna Kerridge, who is an Indigenous. Um, I'm not sure whether she'd describe herself as an activist, organizer, teacher in New Zealand. So localish to you, Maureen.
yeah.
And she was making a similar point about this, just of, it takes two people. One person can say to their neighbor, I want to plant an apple tree. And that can lead to them saying, you know what, let's do it. Or maybe I'll plant a chili plant. And if you plant an apple tree, and then we'll exchange, and then other people pick up on the idea. It just requires that person going, talking over the fence to their neighbor for the first time, possibly, and just saying, oh, what are you up to? Sparking that conversation, finding that interest, finding the
Mm,
common interest, and kind of sharing in a passion, and people will follow that example because it is something that we all need. And I
yeah.
think if sometimes it's just seeing the example, or being shown that it is okay to do this, to step out of the day-to-day way that we're encouraged to think. I also think that there's quite a bit of there's even more possibility that this can happen now. I think after COVID, with a
Mm,
lot of where people recognize that need for mutual support and mutual aid society sprang up. I know that the reality is a lot of things have flipped back to normal since, but I still think that there is going to be a long tail of that experience for people. And also younger generations. I was reading an article by someone who was exploring the narrative that we're often told of kind of, oh, the younger generation are lazy and they don't want to work. And this article was making the very important point that actually maybe the younger generation just don't get
mm,
don't have that same mindset. And are actually saying, you know what, this isn't enough. They're learning that life can be more than just that. And again, like it's a kind of tipping point because there could be a reaction against it. We could slip into kind of, as we are here in the UK, trying to be a more punitive approach to people who are not in work or who are choosing work that isn't kind of the stereotypically valorized type of work. But I think as well, it just shows that those green shoots are there and nurturing that and supporting that and actually having more and more people come around and say, you know what, this doesn't have to be it, will be
mm.
really powerful.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. It's about changing attitudes too, isn't it? So it's a
Mm,
mindset, changing our attitudes towards behaviors when, sort of understanding the emotions behind it. I think it's could make a huge difference. But yeah,
mm,
just on a personal level, how have you recognized when somebody needs compassion? So what do you notice or what do you look
mm,
for? What have you seen? When like, is there something particular that you notice in somebody that they might need
mm.
compassion?
It's such a great question. And I would say, obviously, first up, that I'm a constant work in progress myself, and I'm sure
Yeah.
I let plenty of people down with this. Um, hmm. I
Because I
think
was just thinking about, like when I see somebody who is aggressive, I automatically think that person is fearful,
hmm,
um, so that's how I would recognize that somebody needs compassion.
I think it's important it's important to recognize that everyone will have
Mm,
struggles and that they are doing their best in any circumstance. Taking that as your kind of starting off point. Um, a couple of things that may not directly answer that, Maureen, but I think creating a space where people can show up as they are and that where they're not going to feel judged for displaying their emotions is really key to creating the possibility that you might even be sent signals that someone isn't okay. And so not imagining that it's all on them to kind of show up and tell you or display this need for
mm,
compassion. There's work to be done on both sides in terms of creating that um, safety to be able to show up that way. Um, I think that a lot of the people that I work with, um, mm, I was going to say, I think I work a lot with people who, you build that relationship over time, and often, therefore, you're taking small cues from, you know, you kind of build a picture of what they're like and their mental life and their life behind the screen, as it were, or behind the work that they do, and so you're picking up, looking for those small cues all the time that something may not be okay. I think also what I would try and do is, and I definitely can work on this, but genuine inquiry from my side or
mm,
from one side into how someone is doing. Like, I said about creating the environment where they feel safe, but also intentionality of how you're asking someone is and inquiring personally and individually about how they are will help get to that. So even if at first they're not displaying that, they're in need of some support at that time, you may be able to get to that if you show that you're genuinely interested in how they are. Have this, such a culture of small talk at the start of the meeting, get that out of the way, right? Let's get down to the real stuff, and no one feels
mm,
particularly seen or heard
mm,
by that. Um, I think it is a practice as well, Maureen. Like you said, when you see that a kid at school is angry, your first thought is to think there's some fear, there's some anxiety. And I think that is such a powerful point that actually often gets lost, that every interaction is an opportunity for you to practice
mm.
your own mindset. And like I said, I think I have to work at that myself and also offering myself compassion when tuning into, oh, I'm feeling pretty rubbish about how this piece of work is going. What is that? Where's that voice coming from that's telling me that? Why is it telling me that? And can I offer myself some support in this moment? So it is those triggers, though. I think that's it, Maureen, is those like curiosity about how that person is feeling and taking that breath before
Mm.
you kind of jump to any form of conclusion
Yeah.
about what's going on for that person.
Yeah, very often it's just
Mm.
as you say, it's that small talk. Oh, how you going? Blah blah blah, and then you just move on. You don't really
Mm.
take the time to listen. So, yeah, I think it's a really
Mm.
important point that we do take time and get curious about
Mm.
what's happening for people. So, um, have there been situations when you've found it difficult to act with compassion, like if you've had boundaries or
Mm.
expectations, as part of your work or your role. Yeah, so have you found it difficult at times?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the times that I find it most difficult are either a combination of myself not having given myself some compassion and I'm perhaps struggling or overworked, tired, and
Mm,
bringing all of that to some sort of interaction. I will be honest, I sometimes struggle when I've been interacting with the time I find it most hard to offer compassion is for people in positions of kind of maybe of power and privilege who, and I think this is a problem we're facing in society in
Mm,
general, and we're still, and I think we're working through what does that mean for compassion? Should we be able to offer compassion for those who wrong us and harm us? Um, and should know better. That's the kind of situation I really struggle with. And there's a part of me that really strongly wants to kind of, um, you know, shame them wouldn't be the right language I'm going for here, but kind of show what's morally right, and it's black and white, and you shouldn't have behaved like that, and you should do better. And then there's the part of me that does all this work on compassion things where you've got to understand their upbringing, where they come from, pressures they're under, and that I don't think anyone's ever going to think there's a right answer. There's going to be a balance between the two about kind of keeping to your own integrity, what is right for what's the thing that's going to cause the least harm, what's going to help create a culture of care, whilst also helping inviting that person to grow and do better in future. But that strong desire, and I think that is something we see played out really dangerously in society, is shame. And
mm,
by that, I'm not particularly talking about um, uh, cancel culture and things like that. I'm not particularly interested so much in that. I mean shame in terms of shaming the powerless, shaming people or shaming those who have traditionally, historically been marginalized, people who, use social security, refugees and asylum seekers, that community, because that's where the real harm gets caused and pain and suffering is perpetuated and inequality grows, because we know that humans do have a real that there's an evolutionary reason why we feel disgust. It helped us survive when we needed to feel disgust because something was going to actually be dangerous to us if we were to eat it or drink it. And it's kind of become associated with a whole other load of sensory processes and psychological processes in us, which, going back to politicians, they can be very, very clever at tapping into that sense of disgust and making us imagine certain groups in society as feeling dirty and
mm.
a threat to us. This is a long way around of saying that's a major problem that we've got to deal with. I have it kind of, I suppose, in another way that I sometimes feel disgust about, perhaps the way that people in positions of power act towards others, and how I navigate that is and do so while staying true to myself, but feeling like I'm being clear and strong, and it's something I'm working on.
Yeah, there's a fine line, isn't it? It's really hard to
There is,
balance
yeah.
that, so,
Mm.
I've experienced that myself. So, but yeah, it's a I don't know how we navigate that, but that's what I guess they're feeling anxious in that as well. But but it's the judgment of people, and the shaming of people who, have huge barriers to overcome and behave, that is not necessarily approved of in society, but it's the shaming that just makes it all so much worse, well, from
Yeah.
what I see. So.
Mm.
Yeah, but I think we've got a long way to go.
We do, and I think as well that like how you navigate that individual, that specific interaction is one thing, but actually there's a whole other world around it of the system that's created that person, and putting our energy into thinking about cultures, processes, practices, systems, policies that would make it less likely that that kind of uh not that kind of person maybe, but that kind of inclination of someone or behavior will continue to arise in the future is probably the best
Yeah,
step forwards, as well as in that moment, just offering yourself and that person the compassion that you feel able.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So just changing the subject now. What have
Mm.
you learned about yourself? What's the most significant um, learning
Mm.
that you've learned about yourself while supporting others? And maybe, what's been the most rewarding as well?
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll start there because that's perhaps slightly more. Yeah, I'll start there. The reward is learning about people and perspectives and their stories, and um feeling in communion with people and that connection with people, even though we're in different parts of the world
Yeah.
and often in quite different cultures.
Yeah.
Especially you mentioned more in the connectors that we've worked with on the continent of Africa, some in South America as well, who, we have different cultures between the UK and Australia, but even more perhaps diverse. Um, and I'd never done that before, really. I'd worked largely in the UK, and that has taught me like that despite there's so many of those differences around us and in the cultures and societies we live in. I'm trying to avoid sounding anything like a cliche here, but the commonalities between us, the things that we can connect over, there's so many. And I think just having experienced that has been really powerful. Um, what I've learned about myself is that actually that is something that moves me and inspires me and makes such a difference to my life is having that sense of connection with others. Again, it's not something that necessarily previous work in NGOs or campaigns had created space and time for.
Mm.
It was very much project planning and like deliverables and getting this piece of work done and impact. And um, I think I've come to realize not only that I'm much more moved by that kind of community building and that what feels like meaningful engagement with people, but also that that's where the impact does happen and does arise. And it's very unlikely to be in some kind of um, uh, detailed plan of action. It's much more organic and comes through inquiry and inquiry into yourself and that process. Having said that, I'm also learning that there's a lot for me to learn about how that process works and the biases and assumptions that I carry with me about how to kind of build a movement for change. A lot of that's been challenged by working with the connectors and the GCC, and I'm glad that I've had the opportunity. And I feel like one thing I have been is open to learning through that process, but there's still so much more
Mm.
for me to learn, I think. Yeah, so it's been a real shift in perspective and understanding.
Yeah.
Um,
I think one of the greatest things that I've learned is being able to relate to people on a heart-to-heart level, and I think
exactly.
that's
Mm,
yeah, I think that's
mm,
has made quite a significant difference, and I guess suspect that's the same.
mm.
So for you as well, being able to connect at that heart-to-heart
And
level.
and and to trust in that as well. I
Yeah,
think that
yeah,
we often, I think relationships don't happen sometimes because of fear and
yeah,
fear, relationships of any kind, I mean, and there's been a lot to navigate in working with the connectors, particularly for those who, like we said, continent of Africa, really difficult circumstances that they're working in. And I've seen others in the organization where there's been that fear of kind of stepping into that work and thinking, God, what are we going to open up here? And the challenge is, it's the challenges. What are they going to throw at us? Like what trouble are we going to get into through doing this work? But actually, um, trusting that exactly like you say, more in that heart to heart, that belief in human connection and just focusing in on that as the starting point, and amazing things will
yeah,
happen.
yeah. So
Mm.
you've probably mentioned already, but I'm just wondering what what matters to you? Like, what gives you a sense of
Mm.
passion or empathy? So obviously, probably just the connection that you have with people really gives you meaning and purpose and making a
Mm.
contribution. Or is there anything else that drives you?
Yeah, it's a great question, Maureen, because I think this is something else that's shifted since doing this work. Because it used to be kind of thinking the reason I got into compassion was I sort of felt like there was this thing, compassion, that I wanted everyone to kind of know about and be
Yeah.
able to use and access. And I think I still feel that that is what drives me. But it's that was obviously fr- the framing of that is still very much like I've got this bit of knowledge that I've picked up. You know, other community has it as well, but I'm taking it out into the world. And I think what the GCC, because of these interactions, has rightly, and anyone probably listening would have pointed it out straight away, should have thought is like, what is it coming back at me? What am I going to learn through this process? And it's shameful to have to say that that wasn't something that was kind of top of mind. And therefore, the process that makes that happen and makes that possible, like you say, the connection, the common humanity, that is what drives me. I I worked for quite a while in politics. For a while, I thought that's where I wanted to be because I thought that's where you make a difference. That's where influence is. I think I've learned, again, a lesson that many people probably had learned sooner than I had. It's not necessarily the case. If by difference you mean something that feels deep and meaningful for people, you have to go to that. You have to do that work in community, inquiry, um, building connections, because that's the fabric of society and that's what changes society. If you're just working at the kind of level where you think there's power, nothing really shifts because the system doesn't want it to. The only way you can do that is through the roots of society, and that happens through these human connections. And as I said, being open to that learning process. I think, I'm not in the GCC now, and that is what I miss most of those kind of regular um, points of connection that, were in my calendar every week, and I was very lucky to have every week with people. So that's something I'm going to be looking to rebuild.
Yeah. So what, where to from here then, Matt? So what are your plans? What's the future for you?
Mm. Yeah, thank you, Maureen. I'm staying in the same space for sure, and I think trying to take some of the learnings from what I did. So, um, myself and a couple of other allies, colleagues that I met through the GCC, we're hoping to get launched an initiative we're calling Commonplace. I'll send you, Maureen, the link to the very tentative website that we've put together. And the idea behind that is to create an opening for people to explore, I think, where we started this conversation, really, the stories that they're living by, the stories that they're telling about themselves, about other people, their capacity, their motivations, human nature, what society has to be like. We live every day following a script about
Mm.
what society has to be like, and it's people that will change that and they can write their own and break out of that. And we want to offer people that space. There's not going to be one story that people are going to rewrite. It's not like we followed one, now we need to follow another. Not at all. It's going to be multiple, many, many, many different forms of expression, but it's all about expressing your needs, your realities, and your and the things that have made us connect in the past and the reasons why we've connected. So trying to give people that space um, is what we're going to try and do.
Wow. Can't wait. Sounds
Mm.
very interesting.
Mm.
So, for each of us, when we're moving from, our compassionate and sort of value-based intention, to actions, where do you believe, for connectors, where do you believe the easiest place would be for us to start? And what do you think would be the most effective action that we can take? Is it just having a cup of coffee with a friend in a community, or what's the easiest and simplest thing we can do?
Yeah, I think start speaking to people, and that was actually something that was kind of at the heart of the connectors to start with, and we didn't prioritize quite so much because I think I came in with that kind of like, well, you've got to form a group and you've got to create a plan, and I
Mm,
think if I was having my time, I think we did some great things with the connectors, and the connectors continue to do. But
mm,
if I went back to the start again, I think I might prioritize that more. Is just that start having conversations, find some common ground. Look, I think tap into stuff that in your day to day you're often might feel is lacking. And that tends to be things like fun, creativity, and care and connection. And go where that feels like there's a possibility of creating that with someone. It can be one other, two other, however many it is. I think deliberately creating spaces for that to happen, like this neighbour's 60th birthday party, or perhaps slightly even more deliberate, like some of the coffee events that you've run more in,
Mm,
is a really good place to start.
mm.
People will come to this in their own way and their own time, and you can't force it. And actually, just opening the door for them through those conversations is where I would start. And also, don't forget yourself as well in that. And what are the kind of stories you're telling about yourself that you feel might be unhelpful and that are holding you back? And there's obviously loads of great work that's already, resources that are provided on that already. Our interest with what we're going to try and do with Commonplace, and I think was also at the heart of the connectors, is about what that means for how you act in the world and how you think about community and work and everything. So it's not just about kind of like trying to survive, it's actually about trying to change things.
So absolutely. So the GCCs, the point of their festival for compassion,
Mm.
or, and our National Day for Compassion really is to work together, with like-minded people and other organizations. So what do you think is the best action that we can take to come together, to work together, you know, to,
Mm.
to actually supercharge the momentum of compassion?
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is a real, it can be, you said at the outset, Maureen, about the kind of connections that are now building with the Australian Compassion Council Charter, GCC connectors, possibly with Compassion Politics in Australia as well. And that's really fantastic because um, one of the major problems, I mean, separation and individualism, as I said, is kind of a major problem in society in general. That can then play out in a unwillingness of organizations sometimes to share resource or share space and co-organize. And it can throw up difficulties, isn't it? There's no hiding that. So just to say, really important that that gets done and continues to happen. Um, there's no one size fits all, of course, for kind of building those connections, but trust, trust in the um, well-meaning intentions of the others, um, finding the common ground, of course, finding where you can add value to one another and support one another. And I think sort of radical openness and transparency and sharing and modeling a very different way of working yourself, and allowing others to then perhaps follow in that. So if that's kind of like sharing information about another organization with all your members and supporters, or um, helping to inviting them along to meetings that you've got to present or to be part of planning meetings that you have with other organizations, just trying to think, how can we show a different way of working that might inspire others in the group? And then, as I say, it's the usual things about finding where those commonalities are that you can multiply your efforts by pooling power and resource together, and also being cognizant of the communities that at present might not be in the room and need to be invited and need to be a part of it, because that can easily be a blind spot in terms of like who's not being represented. And
Mm.
just by giving them that space and platform, some really amazing things can happen.
Yeah, it's a relatively new thing for, us connectors here in
Mm,
Australia, to join with the Charter and the Compassion
mm.
Council. So, but we're working together,
It's brilliant.
for our
Yeah,
National Day. So I think, it's a great thing for us to come together.
it
And I
is.
think,
Mm,
we all bring different things to the table. There's lots of academics in
exactly. Mm,
who've done lots of research, and we know the benefits of compassion. in society, and there are others that have those skills about, well, how can we bring it all, how can we bring it all together? So that's
Mm.
what we're working on now. So hopefully,
And celebrating that difference as
yeah.
well. I think that there's such a, again, a kind of like, I don't know what, I bring everything back to the same problems, I think, but I
Mm,
think there is a sort of like, grouping organizations into type, and you do this and we don't do
mm,
that. And that's not how problems get solved.
mm.
Like, it takes all forms of creativity and intelligence of all different types. And putting that aside and just focusing on what you do have in common is
Yeah,
the way that you'll make change. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Um, so if there's one final word, Matt, that you could add, or
Mm.
anything that you would wish that people would, one thing that, you would wish people to understand about compassion. Is there anything else that you could add? Anything that would,
Yeah, well, it's not just about compassion, but it's actually, I think, I just want to bring it back to you, Maureen, because I told many people this, and sorry to embarrass you, but you were one of the first connectors that we had, and then I think one of our first national coordinators, the connectors as well. And for anyone else who wasn't involved in the connectors at the early stages, it's important to know we didn't really know what we were doing.
Mm,
We kind of threw it open. We had a notion of the kind of vision, or I suppose the mission, maybe like the passion, but it was very much like, let's build it together. And Maureen was one of the people who did that, and did that despite lots of setbacks in terms of like people maybe not showing up for meetings or coming to circles when we tried those out, and didn't stop. And I'm not saying that someone has to kind of like self-flagellate and burn themselves out, but didn't stop because you felt driven by a passion and a motivation, and you felt that this was what you wanted to do. And there will be setbacks, and there will, because we're trying to change things, we're trying to do things differently. It's really hard. The system resists that incredibly well, and just allow that passion to continue to burn and shine through, and it will. I really believe things will pay off eventually, and I think that they really are now. You've got multiple groups, you've got this connection with other organizations, you're developing stuff in schools, and kudos to you, Maureen. Thank you for it. And I think that's the example, that's the message I would leave people with.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Mm.
Right, thank you. Well, thank you very much, Matt. I think our time's up. It's been an absolute
Mm.
honor to speak with you today. Thank you
Pleasure.
for sharing your time, your experiences, your expertise, inspiration, and your heart
Mm.
today. So
Mm.
thank you, and may we all
Mm.
continue on our heartfelt journey to create a more compassionate world for everyone. So thank you very
Mm.
much, Matt.
Thank you, Maureen. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.